Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Today I'm down at this end of the model railroad because this is where we're going to be building the Helix for the Piedmont Southern to go between the staging level and the main level of the model railroad. And today we're going to start by talking about how do you design a Helix so that it will work properly with your model railroad, with your locomotives, and with the length of trains that you want to operate. But before we do get started, I want to ask any of you guys that are new to the channel or any of you that have been sitting on the fence about subscribing, please go ahead. It's very easy to do. It only takes a few seconds and it's free. All you have to do is hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Today I only have a very short amount of feedback for you, and this relates to the ON30 equipment that I offered up for sale last week. I've had a good response on that and have sold quite a number of pieces to people. I have put up a revised copy of the spreadsheet that shows everything that has been sold and whatever is left. So if you're still interested in purchasing some of it, go ahead, take a look at the website, and I'll put the website address in the description to this video again, and you can go to my website and take a look at what's available still in the ON30 category. Now, one thing, as I was digging around and cleaning out under the layout for the Helix, I found some additional locomotives that I knew I had, but I hadn't been able to track down. I came across a pair of these narrow gauge consolidations. They're an ON30, as I said, and they are a very, very large Bachmann locomotive. The locomotive just on the other track behind this one is a 00 scale Prairie. So that gives you some perspective on just how big this is. This is a true O-scale locomotive, and it is good sized, it is heavy, it runs well. Now, on the other locomotive, it's painted but undecorated. It does not have the painted roof. It doesn't have the striping along the running boards. It does not have the red cab sashes. So it's just straight black painted. It does have the DCC onboard that Bachmann produced it with. This one here, though, at some point I took out the Bachmann decoder and I put in a Tsunami sound decoder. So let's have a listen. So it has pretty good sound. It runs very well. I've checked it out here on the layout, and there's no problems at all with it. So both of these locomotives will be offered for sale. Now I'll point out that the sound package in the Tsunami decoder in this locomotive, it's based on a C-class consolidation. I can't remember if that's a Rio Grande Western design or some other, but at any rate, it is for a consolidation. I also have another Tsunami decoder that I could put in the other one for you, and that one is based on a K27 sound recording, but it's going to sound very similar to this one. So we could work it out. If you're interested, get in touch with me. I put my email address in there for where you can contact me. So check out the description and take a look at the locomotives and the rolling stock that are still available for sale. Okay, let's go ahead and get started and take a look at some critical design elements that go into putting together a good, bulletproof, stable design for your Helix on your model railroad. Now, what I recommend and have always recommended is this book by John Armstrong. I mean, this is a very old book. It was first published in 1963, so it's been around in many different editions. However, it's been updated regularly, and it is still available on the Kalmbach Books website. So you can go to the Kalmbach bookstore, the Kalmbach Hobby Shop website, and you can purchase a copy of this book as a great reference. And I've had this one for years, and I refer to it all the time because he just covers a lot of different material in here. Now, here on the Piedmont Southern, we have actually two helixes that I'm going to be building. The one I'm going to show you today, and another one that's going to be in an adjacent utility room that we'll get to in the future, because that one has to go between the main level and the upper level on the layout. So I'm going to have two of these suckers to build. So we'll find out how well the method that I'm going to be using today works, and any modifications I can make on the next one. Now, the method that I'm going to employ was written up in an article by a guy named Jeff Johnston, who lives out, I believe, in Eugene, Oregon. And he used this method on his layout. He wrote an article in the April 2008 issue of Model Railroader magazine that goes over, in general, his approach to this. And if you have a subscription to Model Railroader, you can go to their website, and they have a PDF version of that article available for free. So just take a look at Helix design or building a Helix. Just do a search for that on the Model Railroader website, and you should be able to download a free copy of his article. And it's a great design, and it's one that was used again more recently by David Popp for the Canadian Canyons in-scale project railroad. And that was maybe 5-6 years ago. Can't remember exactly. But he used a very similar method to Jeff Johnston's. And we'll take a look in detail at what is involved with that as we go through this right here. First, what I want to do, though, is take you over, and I want to show you the area at the end of the layout that we're going to be joining together here with the Helix. So let's go over and take a look at that. Okay, I've moved in here where I can show you the ends of the layout that are going to be joined by the Helix. So right down here, this is the lower level where the staging yard is located, further back that way. And right here, this is the main level of the layout. So this extends on down to Monroe Yard. And what we need to do then is make our Helix so it connects this level and this level, so my trains can come in and out of staging and come in onto the main portion of the layout. So the important thing here is the distance between these two decks. So if you look here, we're right at 19 inches. So that is one of those very important measurements that you have to establish. It's very critical for the design of your Helix. So we've got to go up 19 inches. Okay, so this area right here is where the Helix is going to be. It starts right at this point and comes out to a point right about there on the floor, and then goes back to a point right here. So it's going to be 5.5 feet on each side. And then the Helix will just be built right above the base right in here, and it will connect to the end of the model railroad down at that area, and we'll be able to go between the two decks, because I've made all the measurements, done all the calculations for the design of the Helix, and it's the kind of thing where it's going to have to be built out in front of the model railroad and then slid into place under it, because obviously I can't build it under here. I'm sure that some contortionists could probably do it, but not me with my back, folks. Let me go ahead and we'll go through some of the design considerations and calculations that are required for designing a Helix. Before we go on and go over the exact calculations and the like for the design of the Helix, I want to show you my layout right here. The design for the model railroad down at this section. And I did this, matter of fact, I designed the whole model railroad a number of years ago using a program called CAD Rail. And it's been around for many, many years. I've been using it for at least 20 years. And basically allowed me to lay out everything on the Piedmont Southern and test out clearances and all kinds of other factors before I even cut a piece of wood or cut a piece of rail and laid a piece of track. So it gives you that ability to do that, so I highly recommend it. If you are not working from a published track plan, you probably should think about using a program like CAD-Rail or one of the other design programs available. Okay, so right here, this line here is the end of the upper and lower, the main and the lower decks that I just showed you a moment ago, where we measured a 19-inch elevation change. And then the helix will be right here. You can see the approach to the helix, and then we've got our helix, goes around a number of times, and then it will come out on the upper deck. And that will allow us to make that connection there. Now, as you can see right here, I decided to go with a 30-inch radius, which gives me a 5-foot helix. So this is big. It's 5.5 feet across, so it takes a lot of time to actually put one of these together, and you've got to get them designed properly and get a good stable base for it, or else you're going to have something that might fall apart the first time you try to move it into place or run trains on it. And you don't want something rickety and something that your trains are not going to be able to ascend easily. And that means you're going to need a constant grade, because the last thing you want is for a train to get halfway up the helix and suddenly the grade gets steeper and the train stalls on you. So you want to make sure that you've got a good design. And we'll go over those calculations, how you figure out that in just a minute. So that is where it's going to be, and I've shown you already the area under the layout where it's going to be positioned. So right now what I want to do is take you through the calculations, and this is where the math stuff comes in. So let's look at the subject of helix design. And this is one of those situations where, if you remember back in school, your teacher said pay attention in math class because this is going to mean something to you one day. Well, here's the day where it means something to you, hopefully. And I'm hoping that all of you are not glazing over right now as I get ready to talk about this design. Okay, so the first thing I told you, or I showed you in the diagram, that I decided to go with a 5-foot diameter helix. So that's 60-inch diameter. Half of that would be 30. Now the first thing we need to know is, how big are these loops? Okay, how big is that going to be? So going back to geometry, we know that the circumference of a circle, which is what a loop is equal to 2 pi r. So 2 times pi times the radius, which simplifies to pi times the 60 inches of the actual diameter. And that comes out to 188.5 inches. So that means for every loop that I have in my helix, it's going to be 188.5 inches around it. That's a lot of track. Now, the next thing, we know that the height, the difference between the two levels, is going to be 19 inches. So that's straightforward. Now this next one, though, is the height between each of those levels in the helix, each of the loops. And I decided to go with a value of 3 inches in between them. And that's a pretty standard minimum for HO scale. And if you get a hold of a copy of John Armstrong's book, he has a chart in there where he lays that out. However, where did that other 1/2 inch come from? Well, I'm using 1/2 inch thick plywood. So we've got 3 inches between the top of one deck, or one loop, and the bottom of the next, plus a 1/2 inch thick for plywood, is 3.5 inches. So the height is going to be 3.5 inches from the top of one piece of plywood roadbed to the top of the other. So we got 19 inches for the total elevation change and 3.5 inches for each one of those loops. So we can take that and divide 19 inches divided by 3.5 inches per rise, gives us 5.42 turns. So that means that helix has to go around about a little less than 5.5 times in order to ascend the elevation. Now if we look at that, 5.42 times the 188.5 inches, that means that we've got a lot of track in here. And we're going to divide that by 36 inches because I'm using flex track. And that comes out to 28.4 pieces of flex track, or 85.2 feet for the entire Helix itself. And that's not counting the approach track or anything else. So the Helix is about the same amount of track, the same distance of track as the main line on each level of the Piedmont Southern. So it takes quite a while to ascend a Helix like this. Okay, let's talk about some of these calculations here. Now, one very important one is the slope. And you want to try to maintain a slope that is 2% or less. And I think it's probably discussed in John Armstrong's book, and you can find it in various discussions online. But you want to keep it under 2% because that seems to be an operating minimum for how well a train can ascend a helix. Because not only do you have the actual slope of the helix that you have to go up, you've also got the fact that you're going around a curve. So that also increases the amount of effort that is required. So the slope here, we're looking at rise over run. So our rise is 3.5 inches per elevation change, per loop, divided by the 188.5 inches in each loop. So the rise over run is equal to 1.86%. So I'm well under that 2% that I wanted to shoot for. The slope is important, though, because it affects your haulage capacity considerably. And it also differs depending on whether you're using older cars with older Athearn trucks and wheels in them, or whether you're using new free-rolling trucks and wheels with nickel, silver, or chrome-plated wheels, whatever they're plated with these days, the kind of stuff that's typically being produced now. And this value here, the 3 to 3.5 inches, it's important mainly depending on the type of rolling stock that you use. If you're modeling a railroad that is an old early 20th century prototype where the cars were much shorter and the locomotives might have been shorter, then you can get away with 3 inches or even less in some cases. If you're doing modern rolling stock with double stacks and things like that, you're definitely going to need that 3.5 inches. You might even need more. And you need to make those kind of measurements in advance to get a feeling for just what's going to be required. Once you get the Helix built, it can be very difficult to get in between those levels and access your rolling stock if you have a derailment or anything like that. You want to keep as much elevation between the pieces of road bed in the Helix as you can so that you won't have any problems should you need to go in there, retrieve a car or re-rail it or anything else. We've done some mathematics, we've done some geometry, so now we're going to get in here and do a little bit of trigonometry. Although this slope calculation is very important for getting an understanding of whether or not you're under that 2% slope value, it's a little bit more complicated to actually measure the slope as you're building a helix. So how do we go about figuring that out? Well, this is where trigonometry comes into play. We can calculate the angle of a given slope, and we can actually measure the angle, and I'll show you how in a minute. But the angle is equal to the negative tangent of this slope value, because if you do this, it actually comes out to 0.0186, and then times 100 gives you the percentage. So if you take the negative tangent of 0.0186, it'll give you 1.066 degrees. So if we have a way of measuring the degrees or the angle of a given slope, then we can actually use that value. Now what I have here on my iPhone is an app called the iHandy Level. And you can see as I turn this, it's giving me a readout of the angle of the slope I'm setting it at. So I'll be able to actually place my cell phone on the roadbed of the Helix and keep this, make sure that I'm keeping this value to 1.066. So that's how I'm going to be able to maintain that constant slope in there, or at least check it and make sure that the method that I'm using to build the model railroad is going to do that. So if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you can download this from the App Store. I'm sure that there's the same thing available on the Android store as well. So go ahead and get you one of those, and that will allow you to make these types of direct measurements of the angle so that you can stay under that value. I'm assuming that many of you know how to calculate the negative tangent of a slope like this. It's very straightforward with a scientific calculator. I have one that I downloaded from free on my iPad, and all you have to do is just plug in the numbers and hit the negative tangent button, and it will give you this value right here. That's all I did. So very easy to do in order to calculate that value. So that's about it as far as the design goes. We've now calculated the circumference of each one of the loops here. We know how much track I'm going to have to buy. I've got to have 29 pieces of flex track in order to build this Helix. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions about this. You math teachers out there, you might be able to catch me on something and trip me up, but I think I've done all these calculations correctly here. So let me know if I've made any mistakes here. Well, so that's it as far as the design goes, and I'll leave it up to you. I think all of this was up there on the screen long enough so that you can figure out and scribble down anything you want, do a screen capture of any of this, and put it in your files for later use. So next week, we're going to go ahead and start with building the base for the Helix, and then after that, we'll come back and we'll start adding the loops and the track. In the meantime, have a great week. We'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.